coming out, and welcome to the Macy's celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I'm Manisha Lienegay. I'm your host for this event where we are proud to celebrate the heritage of one of the brightest luminaries of the fashion world, Nigel Barker. I'm sure you guys are excited to see him. Nigel is here today to discuss his heritage and how it's influenced him, as well as his prolific career in fashion and his latest book, which is a New York Times bestseller, Models of Influence. In fact, you guys can purchase the book during the event for a chance to meet him and get it signed. So, some good stuff going on. So, following the discussion, we will take limited questions from the audience. So if you guys have any questions, I want y'all to keep them up in the old noggin, jot them down, and save them for later, and we will get down to those. So now let's go ahead and kick off our conversation. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest of honor, Nigel. Nigel found inspiration at an early age through his mother and grandmother, both Sri Lankan natives. Yay! And he started his career in modeling, which later transitioned into photography. He is now internationally renowned for his photography and his creative presence in fashion, beauty, and entertainment. Nigel's work has included photography exhibitions, international editorial assignments, and he is widely recognized as a judge for 17 cycles of America's Next Top Model, host of Oxygen's The Face, and now New York Times best-selling author. So without further ado, I know you guys are ready for this. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Nigel Barker.
Well, how amazing. Can we give it up again for those dancers and the performers? How nice. How wonderful. What an honor to be here. Thank you.
All right, so some people may not have known your background, that you're of Sri Lankan descent.
No, I've been outed by Macy's.
Oh.
You're absolutely right. First and foremost, funnily enough, you listen to me, you hear my voice, and you immediately say English. And in America, certainly, that's the way it goes. People look at me, they see me, they hear my voice, they know who I am, and they go, oh, well, he's English. Right. Now, the interesting thing is, growing up in England, that was not the case, right? Because nothing unique about an English accent in England. However, there wasn't a day that went by as a child where really somebody wouldn't say to me, so where are you from? And, where are your parents from? And what's Sri Lanka? What's Sri Lanka? Because you've got to understand that I'm a little older than you, and growing up in the 70s in London, there were very few biracial children. I was one of the first. In fact, of my little group, I was the only one of any kind of biracial mix at all, actually. So for an Englishman, I was an unusual-looking Englishman. I had this bit of colour, but they couldn't work out where I was from. And also, Sri Lanka, to many English people, was known as Ceylon, not Sri Lanka. So when I proudly said that I came from Sri Lanka, it meant nothing to them. So then I would have to go into, well, Sri Lanka was called Ceylon, and then they would talk about the tea, and it was just, and this would happen sort of 2 or 3 times a day, So the funny thing is that although, I'm only half Sri Lankan, I identify with Sri Lanka in a particularly strong way because of the fact I was constantly called on it. Because I was constantly asked, where are you from, what's your heritage, and questioned about my Englishness, I immediately had an affinity with this pearl of the Indian Ocean, this beautiful island that I had not visited as a small child. I hadn't got much connection with it, except for, of course, my mother, my grandmother, and my aunt. 3 wonderful women, 3 extraordinarily matriarchal and powerful women because of the way they fought for everything in their life, and we'll talk about that. But they had a profound effect on me, and of course, when they first took me to Sri Lanka, as a young child, same age as about when you first went. You told me you were 7. I was 6 when I first went, and I've never forgotten it. And I'm delighted to say I'm taking my entire family to Sri Lanka in July, and it'll be my 6-year-old girl's first time there as well. And I'm hoping she's going to have the epiphany and homecoming that I had as well. So there you go.
Thank you. I'm sure she will, definitely. You did mention that your mother and grandmother were your biggest influences. So mostly your mother, how she played an important role in your life. So how has she inspired you?
Well, the book that we mentioned, Models of Influence, in the introduction, actually, I dedicate the book to my mother and my wife and my daughter. But the actual introduction, the first couple of pages, I really talk about my mother and the profound effect that she did have on me as a young man and as a young boy. And you know, my mother was a model, and I like to say that I grew up with a model in the house. Now, being a model was very different in the 60s than it is today. Not like what we see on television or what we hear about on Instagram or any of those things. It was a very different business. Now, again, think about this. She wasn't just a model, she was a Sri Lankan model. Now, you know, it's hard enough being of ethnicity now and working. Can you imagine the difficulties and the struggles that she went through in the 60s? Stereotyping and all the rest of it. You know, so it's and also not just from outside, but from within the community. Because the modeling business itself was not something that was looked upon brightly by the community, the Sri Lankan community either. And that's something which, you know, is changing the world over. And I think I mentioned to you, for example, not in Sri Lanka, but India, for example, for the very first time next year, we will have India's Next Top Model. So they're just starting it, their very first season. They gave me a call and they were like, "We're on there!" And they were super excited. So things are changing, the world is changing. But my mother, you know, in the 60s, young model, you know, she entered a Miss Sri Lanka contest, right? But, you know, and she won Miss Sri Lanka in 1960. You know, so her story was quite extraordinary. But she had her crown taken away from her at that point because actually my mother is half Sri Lankan, right? So, but she didn't know her father very well. Her father was a sailor. And when they found out that she was half Sri Lankan, they actually took the crown away from her. Now, that's no longer the case in Sri Lanka or anywhere in the Miss World contest. But back then, historically, you know, it was all about being 100% from one place and 100% from another. Now, you know, that doesn't diminish my love of Sri Lanka, nor did it my mother's. But it does talk about the story, and it's a human story, of ethnicity the world over, and how we've changed as a culture the world over, and how, you know, things are radically different, still have a long way to go. And again, it's part of who I am, and it's part of my you know, I guess my makeup.
Oh, so I guess that was a big struggle.
It was a big struggle, you know, it was difficult for her, and I think when she came over, she moved to England with my grandmother. With the money she made from modelling, she moved my grandmother and my aunt from Sri Lanka to England. She had lots of family who were in England, in the Sri Lankan community, and she thought it would be easier. But it was tough. It was tough there too, and you know, back then she was singing, she was dancing. Many of the dances you saw just here, my mother used to do them. I have photographs of my mother in exactly the same outfits, dancing away, playing you know, guitars and playing drums and modelling for Pakistani Airways and picking tea. And in fact, the PG tips that is so famous, these PG tips that are in England, and one of the #1 teas, there's a little Indian lady. It's not Indian, she's a Sri Lankan lady because she's my mum. That was one of the first advertising campaigns that she did, right? But that was, you know, the sorts of jobs that she was proud to do, but also that was really all you could do. Now, we'll get to other aspects of that in a moment, but, you know, you can go ahead.
So you described how your mom did a bunch of different things in Sri Lanka, and also with modeling being one of them, and that ultimately moved you guys over.
Yeah.
And so you also modeled internationally. So can you tell us about that experience?
I did. That was many moons ago. But indeed, yeah, look, my mum, you know, being a model herself, there was a show in England in the late 80s called The Clothes Show, one of the longest running fashion shows on television. It was about clothes, design, fashion. They decided to run a televised model search in England in the late 80s. And the very first one, my mum said, "You should go, you know, you should enter." And I'm like, I don't want to do that, Mum, I'm fine, I'm going to medical school, right? She's like, "Well, just enter, you never know." So she entered me into this competition, and I remember going there and like walking for them and being a little disgruntled teenager and all the rest of it. And they were like, yeah, we like you. So I'm like, okay. So I got onto the show, and it was a televised model search, probably the first one of its type. So it's kind of ironic the way my personal career ended up. But I didn't win, so obviously the show was flawed. But I did get a contract, and that contract, was for a year. And my mother said, "Look, go for it." She's always encouraged me. I mean, that's one of the things. My mother, my grandmother, my aunt, extremely encouraging to do whatever I wanted to do, and behind me 100%, pushing me forward and saying it was okay, and that's how they led their lives. That's why no matter what struggles they went through, they persevered, pushed through, and that's why I say they were these very tough, strong women. My grandmother was reputedly the first woman in Sri Lanka to drive a car. Right?
Oh,
so
okay.
as legend goes, right?
As legend goes.
And she was certainly a very, very much of a maverick of a woman, my grandmother, who cut her hair very, very short in the 1940s and what have you, and did very radical things, which was unusual in Sri Lanka. But she was very much a women's lib woman, so someone who, and all that power and all that sort of push and gusto, so to speak, is something that I've always been fascinated with, and it's one of the reasons why today I'm a spokesperson for the United Nations Foundation for their He for She campaign and their Girl Up campaign. I'm the only man who is an ambassador for the UN Foundation for that particular campaign. So it's important to me, gender equality and human rights, which is what I think gender equality actually is. It's a human rights issue. It isn't a female issue. I'm getting off track here. We're going in tangents.
No, this is great. We're all learning so much about you, so this is great. And it's great how it sounds like the qualities that your parents instilled in you, that started from your grandma, has trickled down into you.
Yeah, no, it has. I mean, I think, when people talk about parenting, it's really, you lead by the actions that you do, the things that you do, not just the things that you say. I mean, anyone can say, do this, do that, but my parents were very active. They would be very actively involved with the church, very actively involved with various charities, and campaign on the front line and bring me with them. There was, many, many years where we would go at Christmas, for example, in England, and instead of doing Christmas, we would go to a soup kitchen and we would give out soup to homeless people. And I remember there would be times when, as a kid, you'd be like, "Oh, but I want Santa Claus," or "I want Father Christmas," or whatever it was. But actually, you do this, and then you learn at the end of it when some older man would look at you and say, "Thank you, son," and pat you on the head, and you'd feel really good about yourself. And it taught me an enormous amount about the power of giving back. And it was something that was very important to my mother and my grandmother, to give back to the community, in all communities and all people, no matter who they were, where they came from, what color they were, anything to do with that. It was to do with just the fact that this is a human being that's in need, and that is the most important thing that we can be doing on this day to celebrate whoever we might worship, is to be the best human being we can be. And that was something that was very special, and came from, my mother and my grandmother.
I definitely agree with you. I think it's the greatest satisfaction, and nothing else feels like that. So I'm sure, I know we're getting off topic, but I'm sure everybody wants to hear about how you got into photography, because you, being an international model, transitioned from being in front of the lens to being behind the lens.
Now, let's face it, I didn't have a lot of options.
Oh.
So let me tell you about that for a moment. I mean, I modeled late 80s to mid 90s. It was a very intoxicating time of fashion. I, worked all over the world. I lived in Paris, I lived in Milan, I lived in New York, I worked out of London. I got to work with Naomi Campbell and, many of the big supermodels, from Claudia Schiffer and Christy Turlington and all the rest of it. And that was a very unusual time in fashion, when there was a lot of money involved in the world, and people wanted to spend it. The Japanese markets were soaring, international world markets were on a high, and the designers and the fashion labels were producing, I guess, accessories and diffusion lines like denim and lingerie that we'd never done before. It was always high street and high fashion, and for the very first time, fragrance and all these different things were available from the high labels, and it was a way to get minorities and people, the nouveau riche, who were rising like never before, to get them in and buying into those labels. And we created really the supermodels in that moment, and I became a model at that time. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4". I've been this height since I was 14. You know, I played rugby, and I was, you know, just built well, and that was just the way of modeling at that time. You know, that was the style of guys, and the models, the female models too, were voluptuous and heady, and you know, and curvaceous and Amazonian, and all these things that we describe them by. But guess what? Like everything, fashion changes, and that bubble burst, and you know, the recession of the 90s hit with a vengeance. Music changed, and bands like Nirvana and Kurt Cobain started singing about anti-commercialism, and the last thing anyone wanted was to see a green, you know, Lamborghini Countach, you know, and everyone with their jackets with the sleeves rolled up, and what happened but androgyny, heroin chic, grunge, and of course I looked at myself, and I was not going to be a waif model anytime soon. So, you know, I didn't want to throw away 6-7 years of modeling. I'd always enjoyed photography, and I had my camera in my hand for years, and, you know, really was actually my wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, but was my girlfriend, Chrissy, who's Chinese, another part of my Asian Pacific American heritage. It's quite a mouthful, right? You know, so I met her and her sister, and of course they had lots of friends who were models as well, and they would come back after jobs every day, made up with their crazy makeup, beautiful hair, crazy hair, whatever they were doing for the job. And I would always say, yeah, when you come back from the job, don't wipe it off at work, which is what most of the models would do. And then all the models that they knew started to learn that I liked to photograph them. So they would come home or come back, and we used to live in this like complex in Italy where lots of models lived, like 50 models lived. It's like a model world complex, quite something to live, believe me. But I would shoot them at night in this beautiful evening light with all that great hair and makeup, and built my portfolio. And a couple of years later, after living in Paris and Milan and London doing this, I moved to New York, and I set up my studio in 1996 in the meatpacking district, and as they say, the rest is history.
Oh, that's some good history, huh?
Yeah, I've been lucky.
So, is there anybody that you haven't photographed that you have been wanting to, or you would like to?
We've only just met.
Oh, that is the biggest compliment.
Well, you look stunning, first of all.
Well, thank you so much.
Doesn't she? Yeah, absolutely.
You guys are sweet.
Put yourself on the spot there, didn't you? No, I mean, listen, well, I would love to photograph you. We can talk about that later.
Oh.
But, I mean, I think there's lots of people. I mean, I've been very lucky to photograph extraordinary people. Certainly, I've worked with some of the world's most successful supermodels, and many of them are featured in the book, and it's a tribute to them. And I've had the privilege to do a book on, you know, Taylor Swift. I did a book on her called 8 Hours, and it was basically a day in the life of Taylor, from waking up to going to bed and everything in between, from her getting on the phone to having lunch to actually rehearsing and singing and rocking out and being a glam queen to being totally chill playing by the pool. So we shot an entire book, 60-page book, in one day. So, you know, exciting projects like that. So obviously all the wonderful and crazy things I've done on America's Next Top Model. Some of these amazing people who I've photographed, you know, and there are photographs around you.
Well, that sounds nice. It sounds like you get creative with it too. I mean, you definitely are a creative inspiration, but it sounds like even with the Taylor Swift book, it's just these ideas that you come up with to do and make a actual book about a day in the life of somebody, and
yeah, you got to think outside the box. I mean, I think one of the ironies is that we often get criticized on America's Next Top Model. People are like, "Oh, come on, those photo shoots that you do are way over the top. They're crazy. Who would do that? You put tarantulas on the girl's face and she's screaming, and like, come on, what is that? That's not real fashion. That's a joke." Okay, you may think that's a joke. When you look in my book, right, you're going to see a photograph. Like I didn't take all the pictures in the book. It starts in the 1940s to now, right? So I'm old, but not that old, right? You'll see photographs there from Abaddon, from the 1950s. And one of the most famous fashion photographs of all time is called Davima with Elephants. It's one of the most valuable pictures that's on sale. It sells for hundreds of thousands of dollars as a photograph. And it's Davima looking extraordinarily elegant in an hourglass figure, head to toe. I think it's an Yves Saint Laurent couture, every aspect of her, every finger, everything perfect. And she's there, and you could imagine if you took that silhouette of who she is, you could put it in the Champs-Elysees and she would look fantastic. You could put her in a ballroom anywhere and she'd look amazing. But instead, she's standing in front of a herd of basically elephants who've got one leg chained to the ground and the other leg is kicking in the air, and it's right behind her. So, you know, the reality is that on America's Next Top Model, we might put a tarantula on someone's face, but we don't put a herd of marauding elephants behind a supermodel, which is what Avedon did. So if Avedon can do it, we can do it.
Well, it sounds like a tarantula is nothing.
Nothing.
Like
nothing, girls. Nothing, ladies.
Nothing like a herd of elephants, right?
Exactly. And I've done some pretty crazy stuff on Top Model as well, for sure.
So, about the fashion industry, given that it's very beauty-driven and image-driven, what kind of unrealistic expectations do you feel it's placed on women?
Well, I mean, I think, listen, obviously the fashion industry and the beauty industry is responsible for many issues, and it has its own issues, the business itself. The world of fashion has its own issues. But I do feel that the fashion industry in many respects is a mirror of society, that it really reflects how we are as a people. And you know what, we don't always like what we see in the mirror. And that is part of the problem. I think that it's up to us more so than anything to really make a difference, stand up for what we want, demand what we want. And I know many of us are, and it is happening, and it is changing, and it is slow. But the fashion industry is a business, and the reality is that they don't do things to upset people. They do things to sell to people. So in case if we didn't want to buy what we're seeing, then they wouldn't do it anymore because they wouldn't be working, right? It is a business, So, I think more than ever now, especially because of social media, the people are being able to say, I want to see so-and-so, I like this guy, I'm following this person, and the editors are reacting. One of the things you'll read about in the book is you'll see how throughout history it's been designers, editors, and photographers who have discovered people, and they've said, you've got what it takes. It's like, Diana Vreeland discovering Lauren Hutton at a shoot and saying, girl, you've got presence, sending her to Avedon. Avedon shoots her, the next minute she's in Vogue, and the rest is history. That's how it kind of went down throughout most of fashion history. Now, for the first time ever, what you're seeing is, we all like somebody, and Kate Upton, for example, and she does a video of herself doing the Dougie, and then all of a sudden it gets 100,000, a million likes. She gets on the cover of Sports Illustrated. She then does another video called The Cat Daddy, which don't watch, ladies, but I see a few gentlemen nodding. They all think okay, you in the back, yeah. Well, that got millions of views, and then she's on the cover of Vanity Fair, right? So the point is that we can see this and we're reacting to it. And then you have someone like a Cara Delevingne, who has 15 million followers on Instagram, and some of her other social media platforms. And, if you book her to do a job, you know that she comes with a built-in audience. You know that fans already like her. You don't have to discover the person. And on top of that, once you shoot the campaign, you can run it through that person's social media and see how many likes the pictures get. And the one with the most likes, you run that as the advertising campaign to the world in the magazines. So a lot of the hard-working guesswork is done for you because social media simply works as a medium to sort of test your work. And so it's very interesting. And this is something that's happened in the past 5 years. We've never seen anything like it in fashion, or the world at large, and it is changing and revolutionizing fashion. So I think it's power to the people right now. It's up to us to put the Kardashians back on the cover of Vogue. Yes, that's right. It's your fault.
So, as you were saying that it's all business, right? Basically, most of it with the images and what defines beauty in the fashion industry is mostly business in a way, right? But
I think it is a business. That doesn't mean it isn't an art form as well. But and there are some fabulous fashion photographers who consider their work art, and their photography is considered art. But but ultimately, it is being used. It's always been used to sell clothes, or to sell beauty, or to sell an idea. That's what it is about. And they shoot for a magazine. That magazine's out for a month, and it goes in the trash can most of the times, unless someone likes it and they rip it out and they call it a tear sheet, stick it on the wall in some girl's bedroom, right? But that's it's a very different business. It's not fine art photography. Certain pictures, certain people's work are considered to be good enough to hang and to frame, to print and to save. And I think now, looking back, when you have this, you see where beauty went, and then it gives you a good idea, an example of where we were at certain points in history and what beauty stood for. And really in the book, the whole point of the book is to talk about how certain women were pioneers and trailblazers in fashion, and how they really helped shape the way we see beauty today. They were risk takers, whether it was a Naomi Sims, who was turned down by every model agency in 1966 and 1967, and really decided to go and see the photographers, got a few test shoots done. One of those photographers said to Naomi, "Oh, I've got a job for you at New York Times Style magazine on the cover. Would you want to do it?" She agreed to it. She got put on the cover, which was a wonderful move. She took that cover to Wilhelmina, one of the new agencies at the time, and said, "Wilhelmina, would you take me on?" And Wilhelmina said, "No." And Naomi Sims said, "Look, how about this? I really would like to get represented. I think it would be good for me to look like I'm represented. How about I send my picture from the New York Times, style section to all your client lists. I'll pay for the postage. We'll see what happens. I just want to say I'm represented by you. If I get a job, I'll give you the commission. You have to do nothing, right?" And Wilhelmina said, "Okay." Well, she did that. She sent it out to the whole client base, and 2 weeks later, a call from Women's Home Journal came in, putting her on the cover of Women's Home Journal in 1967, and it was the first time an African-American woman had ever been on the cover of a national American magazine. 2 months later, AT&T called, and she got booked for a TV commercial. That was the very first time an African-American woman was on TV, on a commercial in America. 1967, Naomi Sims, 2 firsts in a row, and because she said, "I will not accept being turned down, I want to be seen." So the book is made of trailblazers and women like that, and in different ways. I mean, she did it with ethnicity and pushing it through in that way and opened doors. But we also talk about people like Lauren Hutton, who changed the business dynamic of women, and Elle McPherson, who is known as a body model, but she also did the first license deal. And so it's a bigger story of women's liberation, sexual liberation, ethnicity, size, shape, that many models get blamed for all the problems in fashion and the way we are today, but there are many as well who help push those boundaries and change the shape and the way we see it. So this is a book of celebration and a tribute to some of the amazing and wonderful women who I've had a chance to work with.
Well, it sounds like it started with your grandma, right? The risk taker.
It did.
And then
it was my mother and so on and so forth.
Oh, well, I guess we see how they've influenced you. It all ties together, huh?
It does.
So after people read your book, what kind of insight or knowledge do you want them to gain from it?
Well, I mean, I think, obviously the continued love of the business and fashion, and certainly it's an interesting story that takes us through from the 40s to now, and it talks about the economics of each era and how that also affected fashion. And, it showcases many of these great women in a light that we've never seen before. So, I think we, like I mentioned, we're all very used to sort of seeing these successful women, and right now it's always about age, and we talk about them being very young all the time. But I think for the first time too, we have women who are still successful, who are from the, who are big successful models from the 80s and the 90s, and even earlier than that, Lauren Hutton is still modeling, and in her 60s, and Elle McPherson is still modeling, Naomi Campbell is still modeling. Christy Turlington is still, a Maybelline girl. So things are changing. We don't often realize it whilst it's happening to us. But what you'll see too is we talk about how before the year 2000 there were almost no Brazilian models or any models from the Eastern Bloc. So all these things are moving in a certain direction. It's just hard to tell. Not quick enough, I agree. But that's partly, again, I think it's all of our problem that we all have to deal with versus blaming. It's like, let's move together. And now with social media, we can.
Well, it sounds empowering, and you guys know that you can get your copy today, so just throwing it out there.
She could be my agent, I think.
So, I know a lot of people have watched America's Next Top Model, and I'm sure they have a couple of questions about your most memorable experience on the show, or what you learned from being on the show.
I don't know about my most memorable experience. I had so many great experiences, so many fabulous experiences. 17 seasons, a decade with that show. We got to 157 countries. into 157 countries with 100 million people watching the show every week. It was the #1 television export out of the United States, bigger than Sesame Street and Baywatch. So there you go. Fashion rules, people. Bigger than puppets and bikini-clad girls. And in our heyday, we had a really fantastic time. And listen, I had some great shoots, some crazy shoots. I think one of my more spectacular shoots that I remember that really I'll never forget was, I don't know if you remember, some of you out there who know Top Model well, we went to Barcelona one year, and I did a photo shoot in a bull ring. Now, what you didn't see behind those pictures, and those pictures were quite spectacular, was the shenanigans that went on behind the scene. And I'm not talking about with Cara D, which is what they reported on TV, but rather me and the bull. So, first of all, I would only do it if we freed the bull. So we managed to buy all the bulls that the bull ring had, and they all went to pasture while I was there. So I managed to buy them all and ship them out, and they all got freed after the fact, which was my only way I would agree to do it. So that happened. They never really talked about that. I think they put a little blip at the end, but they rushed the credits past so fast you didn't read it. But the more exciting part of it was this. When I was taking that photograph, I wanted to get this bull really running at the camera and being crazy aggressive. And so I was in the bull ring prior to the girls getting in there, taking some shots, trying to get this bull to do this. I had 3 matadors in the ring with me, all around me, dressed in full matador gear, black outfits with gold braided hats and all the rest of it. And I had my photo assistant in there with me, who was holding my camera whilst I was shooting. And then we would jump up, and we would all of us run behind this big wooden platform, and the bull would smash into it. And the matadors, who could time it well, were there to make sure, pull us out the way if anything happened. And we would all run, and we'd run behind this wall just in the nick of time, and you'd hear this 2,000-pound bull smash into the wood. The whole wood would shake, splinters of wood everywhere, and you'd be like, wow. However, I wasn't getting my picture. It was just not quite there. I wasn't 100%. Kept looking at my cameras and going like, no, I'm not sure, it's not right. And, it's still, and you start to get Dutch courage. You start to feel like, okay, they're pulling me a little early. I think I have a second longer. I think I've got a couple of seconds I can play with. I'm not going to get killed. There's all these people here. I'm okay. And I stood there and I was in there and I heard them go, okay, Nigel, Nigel, or Miguel, or whatever they would call me in Spain. They could never pronounce my name. I was Miguel the whole time I was there. And Niguel, which is even more unusual. But anyway, I didn't get up. And they were like, and I heard them shout my name again, and then my photo assistant just grabbed my camera out of my hand and ran off with it. And I'm like, as soon as he did that, I looked, I saw the bull, because I guess I had been slightly zoomed out with a wide angle, hadn't realized just how close he was on me, and charging me down. And I think to myself, God, my assistant, he grabs my camera, runs off with that. He doesn't grab me, he run off with me. He knew what the valuable part of it was. I managed to get up, turn around, and just move my body. The bull swept past me, sliced my back, ripped my shirt, and had it been literally like a quarter of an inch less, I would have lost a kidney or something. I mean, it was a bull's horn that ripped my shirt. So it was ridiculous. And the bull went piling into the sideway. I didn't even know I'd been cut. I didn't realize it all happened so quickly. I ran in. I still keep that shirt, by the way. It's going to hang in my man cave at some point, framed. But I remember thinking at the time, looking at the, at all these matadors and the producers. The producers were going bananas. They were like, "Oh God, this is crazy." Ultimately, these matadors looked at me and said, "You have the heart of a bull," and they gave me a huge hug, and it was all good in the end. So it was a fun story, and it went well. But it could have been chaotic, it could have been a disaster, and they didn't play that on Top Model for you. That's the bit you didn't see.
Well, objects in the lens are closer than they appear, huh?
Exactly. Be careful.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for your story, Mr. Risk Taker.
Well, you do what you can.
Well, let's go ahead, and I know you guys have been waiting with your questions, and we have a few minutes to go ahead and get some questions from you guys, whatever you... So go ahead and raise your hand.
Okay. The fact that you've lived in England and was brought up there, how did you adapt to American culture?
One of the things that I love about America, and one of the reasons why I became an American, was because actually coming here was one of the few places that no one ever asked me where I was from. You know, and I look at the crowd in front of me right now, and everyone's smorgasbord of colours and shades and styles and all the rest of it. But growing up in England, that wasn't the case. I was very much the odd one out as a young man. It's not the case now so much. I go back and it's a much more diverse melting pot than when I was a child. But I think that for me personally, on my own story, when I came to America in the early 90s, you know, no one said to me, "Oh, you don't look like you're English," or they just heard my voice, accepted I was English, never even said was I English, and they just said, "What can you do? You know, are you good at anything?" You know, so that was really what I loved about it, and I think especially in New York, there was such that's what I knew at the time. There, at that moment, such an amazing amount of talent from all over the United States. I mean, and all over the world. It was a melting pot of people many of whom were outcasts in their own little groups, who loved fashion and for whatever reason didn't fit in their own little worlds and communities, but found themselves at home in the fashion business. And New York was a perfect melting pot for all of it. You know, with people with different sexuality, different color, different this, different that, and in that world, no one ever questioned it.
So I know your wife is a twin, and I know you photograph her a lot, and you photograph her twin a lot too. So when you first met her, was that very interesting that there was like two of her that you could photograph? And can you tell us more about that?
That's normally a question a guy asks me. I love it. Welcome to Houston, people. I've got to be politically correct when I answer this question. No, there's children present, honestly. No, listen, I have a great story. Her agent called me and said, "Listen, I've met these two beautiful girls in Miami. I'm bringing them to Milan. They're going to be perfect for you. You're going to love to meet them, and you're going to want to photograph them. They're your type of girl." And he knew that I always liked exotic and interesting and unusual, different types of people. And they were identical twins, and they were Chinese, Norwegian, and Russian. And so exotic, green, blue eyes, and the Chinese features, and slim and tall, and all the rest of it. And when I met them in Milan, I actually traveled to Milan. I'm like, well, I'll be coming to Milan relatively soon anyway. And I went out, and I was still modeling a bit, but I was shooting as well. And I remember I walked straight in, and I had the worst line of all time. The worst. And I usually had good lines. I had a bit of a reputation as being a bit of a Casanova back in the day, right? This was not my line. However, it turned out to be the best line ever, right? So I saw this girl sitting there. For some reason, I just immediately was drawn to Chrissy. And I looked at her, and I'd come in a couple of nights earlier, and I had been sort of mauled by a mosquito on my arm. And I decided, when I saw her, not knowing what to say, and in the heat of the moment, looked at her and said, "Oh, hi, I'm Nigel, nice to meet you." And she's like, "Oh, hi, I've heard about you from my agent." And I said, "Yeah, you just arrived." She said, "Yes." And I'm like, "You've got to be really careful, the mosquitoes are terrible this time of year." And then I unrolled my sleeve and showed her my arm that had huge, big, red whelps all over it. And she looked at me and she was like, "Oh, honey, I'm from Alabama. The alligators got worse. The mosquitoes have a worse bite than the alligators where I'm from." So it was this funny conversation that we had. I said, "Well, listen, if you're new to town, let me take you for dinner and show you around." And by the way, she would have none of me for months. My reputation went before me, so I had to really, work on it and be a gentleman for several months, which is probably another reason why it lasted so long. And for those of you who don't know, I've been with my wife for 22 years. Thank you. Married for 15, and two little children, Jack and Jasmine. And she has a great Instagram account, which is what you probably know, called Chin Twins, and she's an incredible yogi. But I built my book photographing both the ladies, and they might be identical, but I think it speaks a lot to do with how someone's heart changes the way they are as a person, the way they look and the way they seem. And both sisters are amazing, but I truly believe that it's your beauty comes from within, and the story you have to tell. And Chrissy's was unique.
What advice would you give to anyone that wants to get into the fashion industry?
Well, I mean, listen, it's a big industry, first of all. You have to decide what you want to do within the fashion industry. So But that being said, there are so many aspects of it, and for me personally, I think it's good to learn as many parts of it as possible. When I was a young boy, I decided to study, and when I was about 15, I decided to study as a side note to my regular studies. I did fashion design, pattern cutting, weaving, tailoring, and I had a real sense of understanding the design factor of clothing. I was the only boy in a class of 24 girls, which playing rugby, most of my rugby friends were like, "What do you do that class for? I can't believe you do sewing." And even my father said to me, "Wait, why are you studying sewing? I'm spending a fortune on your private education and you're learning to sew." And then I would turn around and say, "Daddy, when I become a plastic surgeon and I'm the best stitcher in the business, there'll be a good reason why." And he was like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Yes, brilliant." So I got total carte blanche to do that. And the reality is, to my friends, I'm like, "Guys, listen, you may think it's a bad idea. I'm the one guy in a class of 23 other girls. I'm the only guy with a date at the end of the week, boys. You guys are all showering together at the end of the game, okay? Let's just get a couple of things straight here." But also, I just was fascinated with it. So getting back to your point, learning all aspects of the business, key. Even as a photographer, and when I first started, I helped with the makeup. I helped with the styling of the clothing. You have to be your own assistant. You have to be, as well as the shooter. You've got to go location scout. There are many different aspects to being in the business. So learning as much as possible. Knowledge is power. If nothing more than just to help advise the people later on in business who are working for you, to be able to say, "No, I like to have a strong eyebrow right now. I think that's the look that's in," or rather, concentrate on the lip. That's, for me, the most important. I want that to shout out and have a reason why and understanding to it, versus just saying, "Well, you do it. That's what you do," right? You've got to know. And I think at the end of the day, the transition point between being just someone who does what they do and an artist is someone who knows when they've got the job done, when they've done it and they've taken that picture. It doesn't matter if other people like what your work is. If everyone else hates it, it's irrelevant. It's whether you like it. You have to know when you're done, when you're finished, and you've taken that picture and you tell the client, "I got it." And it's hard to do. To have that faith in yourself, that confidence. But that's the turning point.
We have one question right over here.
She said, "What is my next project? What do I plan to do?" Well, I'm certainly with the book right now running around, I've been asked to do another one. And so we're working on potentially, not Models of Influence 2, but a sequel, but versus another, concept within the of influence world. I'm also working on a new TV show in development on style and fashion. So stay tuned for that in 2016 rather, which is rather exciting. And I'm working on my first feature film, a script that I've been working on for 2 years. I would like to direct an actual feature. So, don't let people limit you. You only live once, so if you get an opportunity to do something different, go for it. That's what my grandmother always told me.
So, I know we're going to be wrapping things up soon, so before we do that, I heard that you're a good selfie taker.
That's what you do, right? You bring a big fashion photographer in and you ask him to take selfies. Thank you, Macy's. Yeah, I know this is really popular with everyone else, and yes, it has been said that I am the Sultan of selfies.
Oh, Sultan.
I did a whole thing on 60 Minutes. Can you believe it? That's how big selfies have become. And they bring me in to do selfies, talk about selfies with them. I wrote a book called Beauty Equation 4 years ago, which was all about taking selfies. And before the word selfie came out, I didn't call it a selfie. That was my mistake. But anyway, that's one of the reasons. But okay, listen, let's talk about it. Go on, you take a picture for me.
Okay.
You show me what you do, and we'll go from there.
All right. Go
Come
to
on.
my camera. My
Okay.
phone is a little outdated, but
It's okay.
no problem.
Go ahead. Don't be nervous. What would you normally do?
I
I'm already in pain. Come on, hurry
would
up.
hold up the camera.
Yeah.
This is my good side. So
Says who? Come on.
so I'd hold up the camera, and I would usually have this other hand free, so I can.
What would you do with it?
I would click the button.
You need to click the button with this hand.
Oh. I don't think my thumbs work like that.
So listen, first of all, if you've got an iPhone, you can take the button with the plus sign, okay? So some of you know that, not everyone knows that, but that's the first easy thing, easy trick number one. Let's go from the beginning. This is what most people do. Most people take a selfie and they go like this. And they go really high up and they shoot down at themselves. You see it all the time. They're like, boom, like that. And I'm like, what is it about taking a shot from the sky down, an aerial photograph of yourself, that you think is a good thing? When was the last time on America's Next Top Model you saw me do this to the model? I don't do that, okay? Maybe for the cover of Blow Up, that classic shot with the guy standing over Verushka, it looks cool if someone's shooting you doing that, but the picture you get is not genius. I understand why you want to do that. You like doing that because you think it gets rid of the double chin. And it kind of does, it's true, it gets rid of the double chin, but you get a huge head and a tiny body, which I don't know if the trade-off is really worth it. There are other ways to get rid of the double chin. I have a trick. We call it the turtle, and I should patent that too while we're at it. So put your finger on that button so you can actually shoot it from the side. What you're going to do, and you can all do this with me as massive group therapy, how about that? You know, we're going to put our chin up, and you feel that muscle tighten. Right, you feel that muscle tighten as we go up. You come down, you're going to look over your left shoulder or your right shoulder, and you look into that camera and you're ready to take it because your finger's already on that button, and you shoot. Now you have about 5 seconds to get that because that turkey gobble is going to fall down again. So you go like tick, 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 boom, and make sure that photographer. And by the way, even if you're not doing a selfie, it still works. And that's why you see on the red carpet the stars, they go like this, and they go over one side and they lean over. Don't go flat to the camera, you make it look really big and boxy and one-dimensional. A little angle to the shoulders and the body helps create some shape, and the camera likes that. And remember, it's called a selfie, not a location-y. So it's not you might have the, I don't know, the Leaning Tower of Pisa behind you or whatever. It's still about you. So when you're looking into that camera, what are you saying? What are your eyes saying? They're not saying, look at the Tower of Pisa behind me, well, they shouldn't be. Think about your message. And if you can't think about what to say, look at this right now. Do you like chocolate?
I love chocolate.
Okay, as you're looking at me, imagine a piece of chocolate in your mouth, melting, and with just your eyes, you tell me how delicious it is. And if you can't think of chocolate, you can think of something else. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how you do it.
Let's give him a hand. Thank you. I think my selfies will improve after this day. All right, so I want to just let you guys know that, once again,
I'll be signing books.
He'll be signing books. So, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
And if there's anything else you want to say about your book?
I have nothing else to say, but if you have any little questions, you can ask me when you come up, and we'll do a picture and say hi and all the rest of it. I look forward to meeting all of you. Thank you very much.
Aww. All right, so.
Thank you, Manisha. Well, we'll be doing 2 items. A traditional Sri Lankan dance. You know that Sri Lanka has tea. We have tasted very tasty tea from Sri Lanka. And typically in the morning, the young ladies would carry a huge basket behind their backs and climb all these hills in the tea estates. Then they would go and pluck the leaves, and sort of they carry the basket on their back and then put it over their shoulder. So by the end of the day, the basket is full and they walk down, they are tired, and then they offload these tea leaves. Then what they do is, now they want to relax, and they might do a little dance. So this dance depicts that. So it's I would say a tea pluckers dance. Then following that, we will do a traditional music from Sri Lanka. So then you'll hope you enjoy both of these items. Thank you very much for being here, and Sri Lanka.
go ahead and welcome back to the stage, Nigel.